This round, we are going to attempt to find solution. We're not just talking about the political level. Part of it is the political level, but not just. We're talking about direct action. So I would like to introduce again Jill Stein and Abby Martin on stage. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a quote that I think is a really good way to begin this conversation. And it's from the late Howard Zinn. A bit of background on Howard Zinn. He is an historian who did a lot of work writing the People's History of the United States. That's the name of his book. And he did a lot of work on documenting the suppression and exploitation of marginalized people. This includes women, blacks, Hispanics, and he documents and provides another viewpoint of American history. So this quote I found particularly interesting to start this conversation, and here it goes. Voting is easy and marginally useful, but it is a poor substitute for democracy, which requires direct action by concerned citizens. Jill, I want to start off with you. Since you're a politician, do you think voting is the only solution? And if not, what other methods are available for citizens?
I completely agree with Howard Zinn that voting is one thing that we do every 2 years or 4 years, but democracy is not just how you cast your vote. If that's all it was, it would be pretty hopeless. You know, in my view, electoral politics is most powerful as a way to build the movements that we're working on all the time and which are the real drivers of social change. And you know, I think fundamentally we want to build the movements that are really critical where we live in our communities, for living wages, for the right to a job, for health care, to end student debt, to have free public higher education, to end war, and to rescue the climate. All those things go together. And that's a big agenda, but you focus on what's really critical so that you can work with the people around you and build an unstoppable force for change.
Abby?
I think voting is literally the least thing that you can do, and that's, I agree with Jill. For people who don't vote, I feel bad because it just takes almost no effort to just go cast your ballot. I mean, I understand why people feel completely disenfranchised. Like Jill was saying, 40% of Americans were non-votes, and most of those people are people of color and working class or poor people. And that shows you how disenfranchised they are from this two-party dictatorship that just completely does not address any of their needs. So I get it. But it's time that we really start reaching out and building movements with those people who are outside of that system.
Well, I'll comment on that as well, because starting acTVism Munich was a very difficult thing to do. It's not that easy when you see all these banners and these lights and people getting to this point. Even this point is not the end point, but anyways, getting to it was a very difficult thing, because the big questions that came around was when you begin a movement or you begin an organization, there's a lot of energy, and I'm talking about not a capitalistic organization. I'm talking about an organization that is built on idealism, right? Mm-hmm. People have to find ways outside of work, outside of university. You have deadlines every day. Think about it as a single mother. And outside of their jobs, to find ways to engage themselves. And that was the big thing that we had to do. So my personal take would be, one has to organize their life and find discipline for it. And that doesn't mean you do it every day. It doesn't mean you do it every week. It means you find a time in the year and try to repeat that act. And this is how people like organizers, I organize a lot of the capacities within acTVism Munich. This is how people like me can then coordinate those points. There's a designer, oh cool, there's an editorial person, oh, how can I get that editorial text on the design? Then people can start planning capacities. And doing that over a period of time, you start seeing something develop. It's like a flower bloom, So that would be my little comment.
Yeah, we all have our own creative capacities, and we need to enrich each other, build each other up, keep inspiring each other. But I totally agree with you. It's so easy to get burnt out, and a lot of people enter this movement and then they immediately leave it because they just go full force and their fire extinguishes itself, because it's so difficult under capitalism. It's such an oppressive system that you feel alone. And so I agree with you. The first step is reaching out to the community and then finding out what your strengths are and building on that.
Yeah, and we had a lot of people that came in this organization, like a lot of them, and I'm so sad that they left. It's not because they wanted to, in the sense of, oh, this is a bad organization or something, but the system ate them up at some point. They had to travel somewhere, they had to find a job somewhere, and that created big holes in our organization. But like you said, Abby, if we find ways, if you have the energy, you will always find a way, in my opinion, to somehow coordinate the ways and come over crisis. And I think the biggest challenge, and Jill, that's for you, like, tell me about the Green Party. How much intra-conflicts do you guys have? Is it like, I mean, it's important that we share the emotional strategy, conflicts that we might have within each other, and how do you go around that?
So, you know, for me, the Green Party was kind of like finding a family, because, you know, many of us are odd man out, you know, in railing against war and nuclear weapons and, you know, privatized healthcare. The system has so much propaganda, you know, it takes a certain kind of, you know, fortitude to fight it. And so many of us feel very alone in that fight. And for me, the Green Party was where I could find lots of other people who were fighting on exactly the same issues, and it was just so exhilarating to find this whole community of support and people who really wanted to do stuff about it, you know, and not just kind of scream about it and curse the stars, but really wanted to do active, practical stuff, come up with real solutions, challenge power, push the envelope. You know, for me, it's been an incredible source of strength. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't lots of disagreements within the party. We're a very grassroots party, which means it doesn't have like a top-down authoritarian style. So there's just oodles of debate going on, but we move as a group. So, for example, the Green Party adopted BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, like 10 years ago. And we were kind of ahead of a lot of the popular understanding. So there was intense debate within the party that went on for years, and we all educated each other, and we came along. And so, yeah, there's a lot of vigorous debate, but, you know, sharing an agenda for people, planet, and peace over profit is kind of the unifying thing, and the unifying thing is activism. So for me, you know, it's really been a great kind of moral compass and a guide to where we're going.
So let's jump onto some public questions. Ich habe folgende Frage an Jill Stein. How is the Green Party developing on the local level?
So that's really where the focus of the Green Party is. We get most attention at the presidential level, unfortunately. I mean, and that's not very much either. But our real focus as a party is locally, and that's where we have a lot of local elected officials, and where we're fighting, you know, on energy systems to get public transportation, you know, for free public higher education. These battles are always local, and that's where we're most persuasive and where we really build community. So it's going really well, in spite of the fear-mongering that's going on, whether it's Russia or Donald Trump. You know, there's a lot of fear, and the Green Party is made to, you know, is being made out to be the enemy, you know, public enemy number one, Russian talking points, collaborating with Putin, et cetera, you know, all this nonsense. In spite of that, we're doing really well, and we're growing. We have a wonderful crop of local candidates, lots of candidates of color, immigrant, Latino, Muslim, and it makes me really be very proud to be a part of a party which is about frontline communities and which is helping to lift up those struggles that are really leading the way to, you know, to a better community, country, and planet.
Abby, I wanted to ask you something that specifically concerns activism. A lot of people go in different routes. Some people are fighting for animal rights, some people are fighting for GMOs, some people are fighting for certain oppressed people around the world. What do you think activism should be like? Should it be more like issue specific, or do you think it should always encompass something more bigger than its own cause?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you agree that capitalism is the structure that is breeding, you know, this rampant inequality, violent oppression and imperialism around the world, I absolutely think that the number one goal should be replacing that system, right? So we need to understand the context, like I was saying before, be instructive of how we got here and how we can get out of it, because, you know, it all stems from the same thing. So if you're fighting animal rights, you're always going to be, in the US, there's people who are basically facing felonies for exposing animal rights abuses, because that's what the system does to you. That's how capitalism works.
Because it hurts the profit margins
exactly.
if you're exposing their the way they treat animals, right?
Exactly. So I think just keeping that in mind, I think everyone does have their passion. My passion is media and, you know, anti-war activism. But we can all use our own passions. If you're an artist, if you're a musician, if you're an author, like we were saying before, you can be creative. You can find creative ways to fight the system, to fight capitalism. There's people who are divesting all over the place, and this is something that you won't hear on the corporate media. Project Censored is an amazing outlet that I encourage anyone who's a prospective journalist to get involved in. They are incredibly instructive, and they help you kind of, you know, understand how to do journalism. But they publish a list of 25 censored stories every year. And this last year, some of the censored stories were successful divestment campaigns. Divestment from police, divestment from big oil, divestment from weapons contractors. And so this is happening all over the country, and people are taking initiatives upon themselves in communities, in college campuses, and that's where it needs to come from. You're never gonna hear about it, because these successes are obviously stifled, but that's how we can be making a difference, a huge difference.
See, this is the point I want to make about the media. I always tell people when they ask me why are you so different from the corporate media? And I don't want to demonize the media in the sense that all journalists are evil. They're not. You know, like, we are part of what we call the fourth estate, and we have to protect each other, even if I don't agree with their opinions. But one thing that definitely makes us different in this sense is their capitalist structure. They are a for-profit business. It would be akin to sending your child to school, and you open the school book, and there's advertisements of different companies within it. The information is coming probably from some big sponsor, which also has an interest, and you are charging children based on profitability. You know, like, I was in Pakistan, I grew up there, the educational system is privatized. So the classes were divided according to how much money you have. The A class was always the rich ones, and you saw them, they were dressed differently. I was an F, right? And I was part of, in my class, there were a lot of people that came from the feudal background. And I was the back row also. If you're at the back row, you're the poorest of the poor, which was not the case. I just couldn't speak English, so they assumed that I was from a poor background, right? So putting that into context, think about a school system which puts profits over children, which puts advertisement over the information, the content that you share. And then when people ask me, okay, what's the jump here? Then I say, hey, think about this part of the second. The education for people after you get out of school is the media. I mean, how do you inform yourself after that? And that system is a capitalist system, top down, profit, they're selling you to advertisers. That's what Noam Chomsky showed in his book. And so those are the things that people I don't think understand. And I want to make a last point on this before I jump to a public question is, militarism is also connected with capitalism. As we got globalized on the international level, you needed military bases to protect businesses and corporate interest. So I think in a sense, what you guys are saying is true in its essence, that we cannot fight any issue unless you put it into context. And I think this is what I personally would advise people who are trying to pick up any cause. Put that into context, and if it's not there, then jump the organization, because you're wasting time. And as you said before, we're running out of time. And it's not like the world is going to be a better place if we all start doing some small causes. I think it's going to be a better place if we put it into a system.
I wanted to jump in there really quickly, and you hit it on the head, which is that is the crux of empire, and I think that is also the crux of why we're fomenting this anti-Russian hysteria, because ultimately Russia is another giant capitalist entity, right, that is going to be ultimately a competitor with the United States, and we know that China is as well. And so fomenting that fear and hostility is an inevitability that we're going to confront these two giant economic powers in the future. And that's why empire continues to eat other countries around the globe. I mean, like I was saying before, you know who our friends and our foes are, and there's always something very similar with the foes, right? It's all the people or the countries that haven't bent to our economic hegemony. They're not subservient, they're not slaves to the US empire. So we have to focus on those countries and install regime change, right, under the guise of humanitarianism. So it's very, very blatant and obvious, and I think, we all feel alone. You feel like the corporate media is completely dominated. How can we ever break through? You don't realize that people are waking up. People do not trust the system. Bring it up to your friends, colleagues, coworkers, wear a button. I mean, anything that can start a dialogue, and you'll never really, it's very surprising how many people that you can just interact with on a daily basis and start building those communications.
Okay, let's jump to another public question. Also, at Jill Stein, do you have any advice for young people on how to discover their purpose, talents in the professional field workplace? I feel like many teenagers have to decide it way too soon.
Yes, definitely. And I grew up in a generation where it was okay. Ours was the anti-war generation. It was, the generation that brought the troops home from Vietnam, that was out in the street for the civil rights movement and also for the women's movement. So at that moment of great sort of social turmoil and turnover, it was okay to spend some time like sort of figuring out what your place in that was going to be. And I feel like now people are getting pigeonholed to be a cog in the wheels of this vicious capitalist system that has created part-time, temporary, horrific jobs for people without any security, without any future, without any growth to it. We shouldn't feel like we have to accept that system. The question is always, how do you survive while you're fighting that system? And, I'd encourage people not only to find their connection, and their passion, and to try out a few different kinds of things. Don't be afraid of the arts and humanities, which are so disparaged nowadays. You're supposed to get a nice, secure niche in some very insecure service industry job and, pretend that that's going to be your future. I think it's really important for us to recognize our future depends on each other. And as you find your niche, find it in a way that you can work as part of a bigger team. No one is being more screwed right now than the younger generation, who's being who's being denied a decent economy, who's being thrust into a climate which is collapsing, and into a state of permanent war, which is devouring our resources that should be used for humanizing society and creating pathways forward for the younger generation. So young people have been thrown into this absurd, cruel system, and don't feel like you have to make sense of it, because it cannot be made sense of. It really has to be fought. And the more we can fight together, the more we can live in, work in cooperatives or live in cooperative working situations. My friends, I must say, in the younger generation who have found that pathway have a much more a less steep mountain to climb, because at least they feel like they have some collective form of security. Their rent is more affordable. They cook together. They buy food together. And those who are working in co-ops have a say over their working conditions. So I'd say just keep raising the bar, and don't be afraid to raise the bar, and don't be afraid to take your time to demand more of the system and to find a workable pathway forward.
So, Abby, I have a question for you. Should we take Trump tweets seriously? And if so, why?
I think that, it's hard not to pay attention because he's a complete lunatic and he, uses Twitter as his personal soapbox. But I think the problem is too much focus on it. Obviously, we should be paying attention, but we also have to be paying attention to the evangelicals that he is maneuvering around the country. There's Fifth Circuit Court judges that are completely from like the 16th century that are now basically in positions of power that are going to be there for decades beyond Trump's term. So while he's kind of an internet troll and out there making headline after headline and causing this kind of flurry of corporate news absurdity, Mike Pence, Betsy DeVos, Mike Pompeo, Jeff Sessions, they are radical Christian evangelicals who, and we're talking about a group of people who have not had this much power forever. There is 30% of America who compose of this group, and they basically hitched their wagon to Trump because they knew that they can push all of this legislation through. So that's the scariest part to me. And I don't, impeaching Trump is going to give us Mike Pence, who can't even be in a room with another woman who isn't his wife. So it's a very disturbing situation where, and it's even funnier that they hitch their wagons to Donald Trump because of who he is. You know that he's never read the Bible. So yes, we should be paying attention to everything, but we have to be looking behind the scenes and see how dangerous the people he's surrounded himself with are and what they are doing.
And another one from you, from Wolfgang. What are the main things that keep you from being discouraged and stay motivated?
So you just have to keep going. It's not easy. Like I said before, you live, fight, and die on the margins. And you can't expect to have recognition. You're never going to be on TV. You're never going to be lauded in magazines because that's the work that we do. This is a completely violent, crazy system that we're living in that does not reward dissent. It ostracizes it demonizes it, and it vilifies it. That's very clear with the fact that Jill and I are in this intelligence report saying that this is why our country is the way it is. So you have to understand that, but that's not why you get into it. You get into it because it's not about you. It's about the world. It's about bigger than yourself. You have to remove yourself from that perspective and understand that you are just one person. You can only do so much. But the actions that you take can have such profound effects. And just the people that I've met here tonight, I am so inspired to just keep fighting based on it's just really, it's amazing. It's amazing. So we have to keep inspiring each other. We have to keep uplifting each other's voices because that's all we can do. And yeah.
Jill, you made the point earlier about there's no polling. I'll take it a step further. What do you think about democratizing foreign policy? It's not a new idea. They're doing this in Switzerland. And I think there was a couple of votes that happened on arms trade that got rejected. The basic income, I believe, didn't go through. But what do you think about this idea of democratizing foreign policy? Comment on it before you answer it. Britain, US, France, all the people that attacked Syria after the alleged chemical attack, none of them went through Congress or the House of Parliament. So is this a call for democratizing foreign policy?
So let me say yes, but as we democratize foreign policy, we also have to democratize our media, because the media is perfectly capable of drumming up war fever, as in Iraq and Afghanistan, and maybe not Libya, but there are so many conflicts which have been absolutely catastrophic, where we have been misled basically by lies and deception from our intelligence agencies. There was the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which didn't exist. There were the incubator babies, supposedly, that were being thrown onto the floor, completely manufactured, ginned up lie. Public relations campaign that created public support for the first invasion of Iraq. So we need to democratize, I'd say, our economy, our healthcare system. We need to be meeting public needs. And whether that's happening by way of direct votes or by getting money out of politics so that we can actually elect representatives who are truly representing us. I think the merits of those different systems can be debated, but right now we don't have a tool in the wheelhouse whatsoever. Democracy is really, it's a sham right now. It really doesn't exist. It's been occupied, it's been taken over by big money, by corporate media, by the theft of our public airwaves, which should be made free for public use, including candidates, opposition candidates that the public has a right to hear. Our debates should be opened. They should be run by a public interest debate commission, not by this commission on presidential debates, which is a private corporation owned by the Democratic and Republican parties. So I'd say, yes, democracy is the name of the game, and that must include an economy which is run on behalf of the people, not the oligarchs or the investors. We need to democratize our economy so that it's actually working on behalf of working people.
I would also like to comment on this because this organization, acTVism Munich, is struggling with implementing democracy at its core value, right? It's not because we don't want to, it's because the system, if you think of a square, right, and it's getting smaller and smaller, and one of those within this piece of paper there's a circle, and just imagine the square is getting smaller. At some point the circle will also become a square, you know, if it gets smaller. And so we notice always that whatever happens, if somebody can't achieve his target or her target, right, or we don't, it's always because, oh, my boss just called, I don't have a choice here, I gotta pay that, yeah? Or I have to work. I have friends that work at a bar, Steiner, hi. I see them struggling. I see a lot of people struggling with university and stuff like that, and those people that join acTVism, I see that struggle in front of me. You know, in my own case, I had to go on unemployment benefits to make this idea happen, and today I'm employed at this organization, but I had to radically think about something to get out of the system to create a new idea. And I'm not asking people to do that, you know, I'm not asking people to do that, but there are good initiatives that have started, right? Like your initiative, Media Roots, right? There are good initiatives. I ask people not to 5 hours a week or day, 10 minutes a month. And if you add that up, it adds up to something. Like, I never thought if somebody would have asked me, hey, you're going to interview Edward Snowden and a presidential candidate, then in 5 years from now, I would say, hey, are you crazy? Did you just smoke up or something? Right? But that's what happened. And I really encourage people, start just small steps add up to a big collective change. And that's always, I think history has always proven that when changes did occur.
And when you find those like minds, then those opportunities just come naturally, which is so beautiful.
Yep. And Jill, I have a question for you. Will you run for president in the next election?
So I'll just say that's a decision that actually gets made by voters. And, you know, I'd say if people have an idea in mind, you know, to get involved with your local Green Party, because at the end of the day, it's a decision of the Green Party. In my view, you know, I don't think of myself as a politician. I think of myself more as a mother on fire. And, and every day I get up to fight the power, because I know that my kids' lives, like all kids' lives, really depend on that. They do not have a future on the pathway that we're on. And so that really keeps me on my feet. And I'm looking for any and every opportunity to radically change the direction of our future. And I'm happy to play any role whatsoever. In some ways, I would be very interested in running for a winnable office at the level of state legislature or potentially Congress. You know, I think it's really important that all of us do whatever we can do to help create this massive pressure for change. And what any particular role we play at any time doesn't matter so much. It kind of depends on the circumstances that arise. And I'm perfectly willing to go with the flow. I hesitate to think how many years of my life training to be a medical doctor. And I then was a medical doctor for about 25 years. And then I transitioned from practicing clinical medicine to practicing political medicine, because it's the mother of all illnesses, and we have to change our politics if we're going to get out of here alive. So I've kind of, you know, run the gamut, and I'm really happy to be wherever circumstances dictate that, you know, that I can help make a difference. And I feel like that's the objective for all of us, is to find what we can do and to do it together.
Abby? A question or a statement, let me see. Thank you for your work, Abby Martin, and your honesty. You are a weapon. You are weaponing us with... Okay, you are weaponing
I'm a
us with information to act, but how do we... okay. How do we bring this information across to people who don't know the... who don't know the facts, but argue that it's a conspiracy?
I mean, that is the struggle, right? Is breaking people out of that orthodoxy and that paradigm, and we have to just be a part of that paradigm shift. I think that once people see, you can't unsee. There is a conspiracy that goes on every day. I mean, that's what Wall Street is. They conspire to subjugate the masses with economic, policies. I mean, our government conspires every day. It's kind of outlandish to just discard the notion of conspiracies on a grand scale when that's literally what the oligarchs of the world are doing. But so I think it's small steps. It's showing people the truth on what's going on in Palestine. I mean, it's finding those narratives that are so regimented and hammered down our throats and picking one by one and kind of showing people that there's an alternative narrative, there's a counter narrative to these truths, right? These ultimate truths that control our society and hammer us with dogma every day and that when it comes to Americans, that we're, American exceptionalism and all these notions that keep us in the positions that we're in. So it's little steps. It's showing people the truths, whether it be Palestine, whether it be Colombia, whether it be the U.S. empire, whether it be Germany. Every little step counts. Every little comment matters. Everything that you share really does make a difference. And so never think that it doesn't. I was speaking to someone earlier who was talking to me about publishing a socialist newspaper, and he was saying, it's difficult. How do we get this out here? I can only pass out 10, whereas, CNN has capitalized on hundreds of millions of people. And it's like, people are distrusting that. The more that the system oppresses people, the more half the people are living in poverty. They can't make their paychecks every week. They know it's not working for them. They're looking for something else, but they just don't know where to find it. So you need to be that person that will show them another path. You need to be that person that shows them another truth, another narrative against this prevailing crazy orthodoxy that we deal with every day. So everything makes a difference, and every paper that you hand out, 1 out of 100, someone's going to join the movement, and they're going to be a fighter. And that's because of you. And you may not know, you may not be rewarded for it, but you have to know that everything has reverberations out there and you cannot stop because we need you.
I want to but I'll mention this word socialism. I think is it still banned in the U.S., this word?
Not after Bernie, no.
Yeah, Bernie changed the matters. And when say people, socialist government control and stuff, and I say, wait a second, there is already socialism in place. Yeah, there is already democracy in place, but it's for the very few. Think about it. These guys organize themselves in lobbies. They try to influence policy through money, which is they're trying to... And they have really legitimate democratic institutions within themselves. They decide, they exclude. And what they do through these institutions is they enable to themselves more freedom in decision-making processes at the cost of the majority. So we have democracy, we have free decision-making, but it's for a very small sector of our society, if you think about it that way. So the people on top enjoy democracy, I think, but only for themselves. The moment you open up to it to more people, that's when this stuff comes. Yeah, socialism, government control. But if you think about it the other way, they love influencing policy. They love decision-making processes, but only as long as it is in their own hands. So with that being said, what do you think, Jill, about forming networks here? Like DM25 is a progressive movement that started by Yanis Varoufakis. Yanis Varoufakis, I've interviewed him a couple of times, and he started this movement after Greece got the hammer from the EU, austerity policies, the same thing that they did in Latin America. We don't need to go into the detailed history of that, but and he tried to stand up to the EU and speak their own language. He was demonized here in the media. Instead of having a dialogue like you went to Russia and I don't see a problem if you have a dialogue there. I mean, what else do we want to do? I remember when I was a kid and me and my brother were having fights, my mom would say, go talk to your brother. You know, like, not go in the different room and you guys will not. I mean, this is just
nuclear weapons at each other.
Yeah, just this basic elementary things, and you make the effort to go to Russia and have a dialogue, right? And what do? They accuse you of being a Russian stooge and whatever you have. So Yanis Varoufakis tried to change the system from within. It didn't work, and he started a progressive movement. And he said, I'm not going to just change Greece, I'm going to change all of Europe, right? So what do you think about forming networks within Europe and America, transatlantic networks? I'm not talking about the orthodox definition of transatlantic, but really within movements. Your comments?
Absolutely. I think if we allow ourselves to be talked out of movements, we're being talked out of our power. Movements, inherently bring us together. And just as an aside, by the way, diplomacy inherently is about talking to people you have problems with. It's not about talking to your friends. And that's what we should be doing. And, it's outrageous to think that people are saying the answer to our conflict with Russia is to shut down communications and to expel diplomats and to stop talking with each other. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, what did they do? John F. Kennedy opened doors, which was very controversial at the time. Russian missiles had been welcomed to Cuba following the Bay of Pigs, and Cuba felt like it needed some protection. And so Russian missiles were on their way, and this was obviously very worrisome. And there were those who wanted to just fight back, and to open up the nuclear war. And they proceeded with dialogue and diplomacy, which worked. And eventually we got through the Cold War, and that should have been a time to have really advanced international law and human rights. At any rate, we lost that opportunity, but we shouldn't lose focus on the fact that dialogue and diplomacy are absolutely essential. And when I went to Russia, if I could add, my message there for this conference was essentially that we needed dialogue and diplomacy, not war, and that we needed a weapons embargo was our proposal for Syria. We needed a weapons embargo for Turkey to stop allowing militias over its border, and for there to be a ceasefire. And I was actually very critical of Russia's new participation in the Syrian war and the bombing which had just begun. So it's not like I went there with a kiss-up message. I went there to actually have dialogue and diplomacy, which is what we need, and that should be the model.
And the German diplomat, Willy Wilmer, was there as well, right?
That's right, yes, and he was the person at the
and
table.
nobody's accusing him of anything.
Right. He was the one person I was able to talk to at this table where the Russians all spoke Russian and nobody was introduced to anybody or knew each other's names. So it's not as though there was any funny business going on at the table that Putin only sat at briefly before he gave a speech in Russian. So the whole thing is just so concocted. And by the way, all that happened 8 months before it became a smear campaign. When did they start to care about it? When I got the nomination. When I got the nomination for the Green Party, all of a sudden it became, the smear all over social media. So, this was really conjured up. And truth to tell, I'm kind of used to this because I've been running for office ever since 2002, and they don't like it when people are running for office and they're actually telling the truth and holding power accountable. But to your question about forming broader alliances, that's really where the power is. The power is in building big movements. If we allow ourselves to be divided by national borders or by issue areas, we're divided and conquered. It's about having a big vision for people, planet, and peace over profit, or you can call it socialism, or you can call it economic democracy, or you can call it do unto others and the golden rule. Different people will use different words here, but I think the theme is the same, that we need to throw out the bums here, this economic elite that's absolutely, throwing us over the cliff, and we need to get together in order to do that. The minute we get together, we're absolutely unstoppable.
So Abby, I'll leave you with the last words of inspiration.
Don't stop. You have to keep fighting. the people that you meet in this world and in this movement make everything worth it. And like Zinn and like Jill are saying, I mean, the system makes you feel so alone, right? This individualism, this neoliberal structure where you feel like you have to just, I don't know, work your ass off until you die and never really live a life. I mean, there's other creative things that you can do. And even if you have to work within the system somehow, you can always find some sort of outlet, give an hour of your time a week. And that gives you something to live for. Again, it's not about us. It's not about the individual. It's about the greater good. And it's about saving the world, you guys. I mean, it really is. And so if you have that internationalist perspective, it is what makes life worth living for, and the people that you meet will make it all worth it. So again, keep fighting.
Yeah.
Jill?
Great. Thank you.
I want to thank you guys for coming today. It was wonderful talking to you both, and I wish you guys a safe flight back. I'm pretty sure the CIA has stopped its rendition policies for the time being. The German government is a bit easy on this, so I wish you guys a flight back, happy flight back, and thank you guys for coming again.
Thanks so
Thank you
much,
all so
Zinn.
much.
You're incredible.
Thank you.
Everyone get involved in activism, Munich!
Yeah. Woo.